This Gumbands podcast is made possible by the Buell Foundation, serving southwestern Pennsylvania since 1927, and by listeners like you. Thank you.
Hey, it's Gumbands number 11, 011. Our guest today is Bracey, one of the founders of the amazing Pittsburgh Beer Festival, now known as Barrel and Flow, that this year was named the best beer festival in America by USA Today. Day was born and raised in Braddock, studied at IUP in Indiana, PA, made his mark as a comedian, eventually teaming up with Ed Bailey and starting a podcast called Drinking Partners. He says we met in 2015 at Hop Farm Brewing when we were food and beer judges. I've been on his podcast several times, and now I thought it'd be fun to ask him some questions. It was fun and enlightening. We're recording this on the morning of September 14th, and it's really pretty cool this morning.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a fall day almost.
This is the first time I'm wearing like a full like leg pants. Like I'm in my knees and my shins are covered.
I know exactly what you mean. I have shorts on, but as I drove in, I thought like, wow, should I have worn long pants today? Yeah, it's that kind of day. So, and we're lucky today to have you, Bracey, here with us. In the last 5 years, you've done so much. 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah, about a decade, I would say, yeah.
All around Pittsburgh, organizing things. You have, and this won't come out in time, but you even have a festival this weekend in Sewickley.
Yeah. The reward for hard work is more hard work.
Okay. And this one's called Mavuna?
Mavuno Festival. It is the 27th year. Sweetwater Center for the Arts has put this on for 27 years. And it was for the last 26 or so, a series of events throughout the week. And for the last 3 years, they've been putting on a festival. And this is my second year curating that festival. So I'm really excited to see what we can do.
Cool. No, I think, there's a lot of people in Pittsburgh that don't think of Black history of Sewickley, but I know how it's very rich. And I think I did a story about the Sewickley train station because Duke Ellington used to play there when he came to town. There's always been a very active Black community, probably servants in many people's houses, but Sewickley's got a great history. And when I did my pie show, I always love this too. We found a Black-owned pie place in rural Virginia, Woodruff Pies. And, we had a great time there. And as I was leaving, the woman said, "We know how you found us." And I said, "Yeah, I found them online." She said, "My brother." And I said, "Your brother?" And she said, he lives in Sewickley. And we assumed you'd met my brother, and that's how you made this connection. I said, I did not know that. But, it's always interesting to find out that the world is almost as small as Pittsburgh.
Yeah, it very much is. And I keep forgetting that you're a historian. So every time I sit next to you, like I'm learning, like every other minute, there's like a new fact that's dropped. I'm like, okay, now I got to go to the fest with these new facts.
Well, that's okay. So, but you're most famous for what's now called Barrel and Flow.
Yeah.
And can you remember how that started?
So, being a comedian, we saw that there were two major forms of funding for the arts and entertainment in America, right? It's booze and grants, right? So, there's a lot of grants. It's hard to get those. You got to know people and this, that, and the other or whatever. But we saw a lot of Black folks in the arts and entertainment. They were performing. We're at venues as a comedian performing and whatnot. And we're seeing a lot of this money being exchanged, right? People are buying food, people are buying booze, doing all of this. And then at the end of it, I was getting this check and it was tiny. And I'm like, how am I getting least paid? And I'm the funniest here, right? I'm bringing all these folks or whatever. And what we saw was that there was a huge opportunity by going directly to the suppliers, right? Going straight to the people who make the booze that supply these shows. So we started Drinking Partners podcast, and that gave us the opportunity to, one, get our name outside of just the stages that we were on, but then two, platform other folks in the city that were doing cool things, and three, connect to the brewing industry directly as opposed to, being paid to sell their booze at the Improv or at any of these comedy shows and whatnot. And in doing so, we were able to, lift our brand up and, raise the prices of our tickets because we were giving out free samples. We were providing, quality comedy and whatnot, and places for people to kind of like grow their career and brands. And we saw that there weren't a lot of other black folks in this space. And, Fresh Fest came as a result of trying to connect more black folks directly to this, to the brewing industry, much like we did with our comedy career.
All right. I'm just going to bounce back then for a second. Comedy career. You started with stand-up?
Yeah.
Alone?
Yeah.
And somehow you met Ed Bailey.
Yeah, so we, we were a couple of the only black folks in the comedy scene at the time, and Ed is hilarious, and again, we would see each other at these comedy shows, and at the outside we would get to talking, just kind of like rapping to each other, just busting it up, and people would like kind of like form circles around us. Just start like listening to us, right? And at some point we were like, why don't we just like bag this up and like, sell it? So that's where Drinking Partners came in. It was like, okay, well, let's create this platform or this show where we get to invite people to these conversations that he and I were having, and make it feel as if they're having a drink with us. And that's where the, Drinking Partners podcast started. And it's been a great ride since.
So you began as a podcast, but did you ever do that on stage? Did you ever like just have the two of you do that sort of Drinking Partners thing, or was that strictly a podcast?
So we have done some co-hosting. We've emceed events together on stage. We've done live podcasting where, we go in front of the crowds and whatnot. Our first live podcast was at Brew Gentlemen in Braddock, which is my hometown. And that really was the connection to the brewing industry. So we did this live podcast. It was a big success. And then Brew Gentlemen was like, Asa was like, hey, you guys are great. You're funny. You guys should go like talk to these other guys. We did this event, Freshman Cask with Hitchhiker and Grist House. And we're like, why would you like send us to the competition? You know what I mean? Like you don't go to Lowe's and you'd be like, oh, you like hammers? Well, Home Depot has great hammers. You should go check those guys out, right? But as a result of that, like that collaborative kind of understanding that the brewing industry has, that like, a rising tide raises all ships type thing, right? Because of that collaborative effort, we, kind of started looking at our careers less as comedians who were like competing with other comedians and other, artists or whatever for like attention, and then started to turn our podcast and our careers into something that was more collaborative and saying, well, hey, if we're doing something cool and you're doing something cool, how can we do something cooler together? And that was really, that introduction from doing those live podcasts, with Brew Gentlemen and the rest of the industry or whatever. So we have, me and Ed have done a lot of time on stage together.
Cool. And have you always liked beer, or was that just a thing that happened?
So like beer is weird. I drink a lot of it because it's cheap, right? You know what I mean? Natty Ice was the thing that kept us going in college. I ran a fake frat called Tri-Chi XXX. So we bought a lot of it. We supplied a lot of it to folks back in the day. And, it was a cheap way to, become intoxicated. I really didn't like the taste of it, but, it was affordable. It wasn't until, actually I had a beer, Sierra Nevada, once, like, during my college days. I like saved up and like spent $4 on a beer, and I was like, this isn't bad. But then outside of college, they would have dollar nights down at Hemi's, and they had dollar Blue Moons. And that was the first time that I had like a beer that I liked the taste of. Like they put little orange in it.
Right.
And it felt fancy. And I was just like, oh, this is like drinkable and delicious, like juicy, right? So that was the first time I like tasted beer that I liked. And that was really about it. And then it wasn't until, much later I was, close to 30 when I bought my first mix pack from Full Pint, and they had this beer in there called Perk E Bust, and it was a coffee porter, and that was like, I was like, wait, they're making beers that taste like other things? Like, that's crazy, you know? And that was like the beginning of when I started to really dive into the craft beer scene. And me and my roommates had this system set up, because we were all still pretty broke, but we had this system set up where each week one of us would buy a case of craft beer and then like introduce the rest of the house to it and whatnot. So that was my introduction into the craft beer world.
Well, I mean, the craft beer world is so much better tasting and all of that than the traditional beer that when I was in college, you know, I can't say that I was ever that big a beer enthusiast. But, you know, craft beer has made it a whole new world. And we're lucky that you've been there too, to sort of connect some of these things that haven't been connected before. I'm just going to jump back again. You've mentioned college a couple times. Where did you go?
IUP, Indiana University of Pennsylvania.
All right. And what did you study?
I started out as secondary math education. I went to babysit my nieces for a summer, and came back and told my my counselor I never want to work with kids. So I changed my major to journalism. So yeah, that was my major, journalism.
And you said Braddock was your hometown. Were you actually born there?
Yep, born and raised right next to the Edgar Thompson steel mill.
Yeah? Family worked there in the mill?
Yeah, my stepdad worked there for some time, yeah.
Okay. But I have this weird memory that you once told me that you learned to drive in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yeah.
My sister lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I mentioned that, and you said, oh, that's where I learned to drive.
Yeah. So my mom is Cherokee, born on the farm, raised on a farm down in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Okay, not far from Charlotte.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so I spent a lot of summers, a lot of time down in Wilmington. And my aunt lived in Charlotte, in a trailer park down in Charlotte and whatnot. And that's where, you know, if you're going to let a kid take a car out on the open road, Charlotte is a nice town for that.
No, and because of my sister living there, I wondered, you know, I hesitated to say to people Charlotte because it sounds like Charlotte, like I'm mispronouncing Charlotte.
I thought they were mispronouncing it too. I thought like, you know, my hick cousins were just like, you know, saying the wrong thing. I'm like, you mean Charlotte? They're like, no, Charlotte. And then I went down there and it's not Charlotte.
No, it's Shallotte. And so the second or third time I went down, I thought I'm going to do some research about this, and I found out that it's called Charlotte because the Charlotte River comes through downtown Charlotte.
See, look at this historian. They always learn something with this guy.
What I learned then was it was originally called the Charlotte River, but it was mispronounced so often they just called it Charlotte. So it does sound like a mispronunciation of Charlotte because it was a mispronunciation. I thought perhaps it was a Native American word or something like that, but it's just a mispronunciation of Charlotte. So at different corners of North Carolina, there are these cities that did that. So anyway, you meet Ed at a comedy club, and the two of you become drinking partners and start this podcast. Mm-hmm. You've done a lot of those.
We lost count, but somewhere around 300 or so.
Right. And I think that's how I met you.
Yeah. So we got invited to do the food beer pairing competition down at Hop Farm for Hoptoberfest. And you and Hal were two of the other judges. We were there and we were eating, and I remember, you were sitting there, you and Hal, and you were like all professional about it. Everybody was like, you guys were doing your bites and then sitting them to the side and doing the judging, and like, and we were just like eating everything, like, oh my God, I can't believe like we get to do this. We're just, so then, I want to say maybe an hour or so into it, you folks were done. People kept coming over to the table to you, and like, you're telling them all these stories and whatnot, and like we're still like eating.
You're sitting at the bar.
We're sitting at the bar. We're still eating or whatever, and we get through about like 12 of them. And we're like full, and we're like, how many more do we got to go? And they're like, there's 27 of these. We're like, what? So it ended up taking us like 3 hours, I want to say, for us to finally like finish it. It felt like somebody had like locked us in a closet and made us smoke a pack of cigarettes, right? I never wanted to eat it after that. But that was the first time that we had met. And, I remember coming and saying, hey, would you like to be on the podcast? And you were gracious enough to say yes. And that was like a big deal because, like we had just started out. We didn't really know what we were doing. And to have somebody as accredited as you come on the podcast really gave us, kind of it was a lesson in, broadcasting, right? And then two, like I said, it really legitimized us as a podcast. We had a big thing down at Black Forge and like a bunch of people came. It was live.
See, and I was guessing that's where I met you, was at Black Forge.
Well, that was the podcast that we did after we had invited you on.
Wow, I didn't realize that thing down at Hop Farm was before that. I do remember both events, but I didn't. I had the sequence out of order because I think I can remember asking you there, where do you live? And you said Beaver, and I was surprised that you lived so far away. Like, what is it, 40 miles?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
30, 40 miles east of here or west of here.
Yeah, about north, I'm going to say.
Northwest, yeah, because, the Lincoln Highway went there once. So, but anyway, and you told me about Mrs. Chong's restaurant in Beaver Falls.
Man, it's so good. It's so good.
So that's a question I always like to ask people here. Favorite places to eat? Still Mrs. Chong's?
Mrs. Chong's is amazing. She will always be, even like in this region. I mean, it's wild that it's in Beaver County because that restaurant is some of the best Asian food that I've had in this region, period. So I'd say that, Blowfish BBQ. Shout out to Hootie. Whenever you can find him, wherever he's at, the best smoked mac, the brisket, get the brisket mac. Oh man, it is.
Oh, see,
it'll change your life.
I love his chicken legs.
Yeah, no. You can't go wrong, but yeah, no. So I would, anytime I get a chance to get some of that, that's, my favorite place.
Okay. No, and all these things come together and, at, Barrel and Flow, at the beginning it was called Fresh Fest. For 3 years?
Yeah. We did 2 years Fresh Fest. The pandemic came in, and then we had to do a digital festival, DigiFest, which it was wild because we all learned about it, and there was a couple of months of like, oh, are we going to do it? Are we not? And I was actually on my way to like canceling the event, and then. There was this outcry from the community going like, don't cancel it, like do something digital, do anything you can, but, don't cancel it. And like, I didn't want to do what a lot of other people were doing in the digital format of like Zooms, right? They were just like doing a Zoom thing or whatever. That's boring. So, luckily working with Work Hard, our digital company that we work with Drinking Partners, talked to them, and we found a way to have a format that allowed people to watch it on YouTube. You know what I mean? Like we were able to film, broadcast that, making sure that everybody was safe by keeping everybody distant and making sure that we followed the science and the masking and the mics and whatnot. And we hooked up with Tavor as a result of another person in the community that gave us that connection and was able to ship the beer out, the collaborations that we did for the festival, to 25 states, which allowed us to raise somewhere around like 60 grand that went to artists and small businesses that year in a time when a lot of folks weren't working. So
that was 2020.
That was 2020.
And then 2021, you come back to a live festival.
Yeah, we came back and we rebranded as Barrel and Flow. It's funny because this is a hat that we were originally going to be Fresh Fest again, and it was Refresh. We had these hats made. And then I found out that Puff Daddy owns the rights to Fresh Fest. After spending all this money on trademarking, it came back and was like, yeah, Puff Daddy owns this. And at that point, I was like, well, how about we rebrand? So we rebranded to Barrel and Flow. And, Barrel and Flow for us incorporates, everything that's in the barrel, all the fermentables, right? It used to be Fresh Fest, Beer Fest. And we got a lot of black folks in various industries, the wine, kombuchas, the, liquors saying, hey, we don't have space either. You know what I mean? Can we come here and whatnot? So we went from beer to barrel and Barrel and Flow. And the flow represents the art, the food that's there, the art that's there. And through the barrel flows the creativity.
Well, the flow is, I think, so important at these things. I remember that from the very first one over on the north side at Nova Place. I don't even know if it was called Nova Place then.
Yeah, it was like the very first year, I want to say, that it was Nova Place.
Yeah, and I just remember going to this festival and thinking, like, this is the way every festival should feel. Honestly, I mean, it was such a everyone was so happy and involved and tasting things, and I was surprised to see, food vendors there that I knew, and it was just a remarkable thing. I mean, from the very start, and that had to be part of, the genius of you guys putting this all together.
Yeah, I mean, so, we had been doing the podcast for a few years, and again, we realized that there weren't a lot of black folks in these spaces, in these breweries and whatnot. So our motto is, if we're your only black friend, we'll introduce you to more black friends, right?
Which is a great thing.
Yeah, so, that first year of the festival, the first couple of years, was just a bunch of like former guests, right? Because we were doing this podcast and we saw so many people, so many, small businesses and artists and breweries who were doing really cool things, and we got to do these cool things with them, but they weren't doing cool things together. And we were like, why isn't anybody like talking to each other, right? I mean, in the city of bridges where nobody crosses bridges, right? So we decided to, like, with this festival, build those bridges, and also, build some opportunity for the black community here in Pittsburgh to enter into this $400 billion industry that is the alcohol industry, which meant bringing in black representation from around the country to showcase what is possible for folks. I mean, we don't have, a black middle class neighborhood here. There's no black owned breweries. Statistically, it's the worst place in the country for black-owned businesses. So with this festival, it's really important to showcase to the folks here what is possible outside of these borders, right? And that,
or within these borders.
Within it, right? You know what I mean? And like, and that's as a result of Fresh Fest and now Barrel and Flow, we're in our 6th year between the two of them. We became the #1 festival in America. We have so many businesses and opportunities and stories that have come out of this festival. And a lot of people ask me, well, why Pittsburgh? And I tell them it couldn't have happened anywhere else, right? The cost of living is cheap. So as an artist, I'm able to, I'm able to be self-employed. I couldn't do that in California or LA, right? And, because of the need for, the building of black wealth and community here, a lot of people come here and a lot of people want that here, as opposed to, say, an LA or a Philly or an Atlanta that already has that, right? They don't need it nearly as much as Pittsburgh does. And by building that and showcasing that, because of the opportunities that Pittsburgh provides, people come in from all around the world and are amazed at what is possible. And at first I thought this was a thing that was unique to Pittsburgh. But I mean, people came in from the second year of the festival. There was an Indian family that flew in, and I was like setting up, and it was like too early for anybody to be there. And I'm like, hey, can I help you? And they're like, hey, we're just finishing our meal, and then we're gonna get to volunteer. And I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, we flew in from India to volunteer at this festival. And I'm like, holy, But it shows how much of a need a space like this was, how much of it was needed. Not just for Pittsburgh, but for the world, right? And, and the more we do this, the more we see people coming in from Guam and the Netherlands and Australia. I just got invited to the Barcelona Beer Festival in March, right? Because of what we're doing here in Pittsburgh, they want me to come out and teach them our ways, right? So
that's the best. And, but from the beginning, you had this really great idea of these collaborations where you pair an otherwise white brewery with a black artist, another comedian, or something, a local politician, all kinds of people collaborating on a beer, which is like, where did that idea come from?
So, when you're trying to build community and whatnot, like, you can either do the common enemy thing, which is what a lot of folks do, nefarious folks, or you can build a common goal. And that's where the collaboration came in. You know, we wanted to do a black beer festival, and it was like, well, how are we going to build these bridges? How are we going to do a black beer festival in a city that doesn't have any black breweries? And that's where this collaborative method came in, because all these breweries kept coming to us and going, hey, you know, love your podcast, love what you guys are doing. Like, you want to do a collaboration. And, you know, again, that helped our career a lot. It also helped boost the local brewing scene, because we were able to introduce them to people who normally wouldn't be going into their breweries and whatnot. And they were, you know, that cross promotion, right? So with that, we were like, well, how do we extend that beyond just, you know, ourselves? And if a couple of comedians can do it, anybody can do it, right? So with this, we have, you know, so this is an example of one of them, Attic Brewing out of Philly. And then Melanated Mashmakers podcast and, you know, Black Brew Group. They came together to make this brew. You know, they have a conversation. They talk about the styles that they like. They brew something that they like, and then they pay a black artist to design the label. It's a paid and accredited black artist, right? So a lot of folks were, you know, you look at the industry, and a lot of the industry at the time was utilizing black images, Biggie and this, that, and the other, you know, Tupac on their labels, but nobody black was a part of it or being paid. So we know that beer drinking culture likes black culture. You know what I mean? So we know that. Now, how do we do that in the right way? How do we actually pay black folks for the products that they're selling? And these are mutually beneficial relationships that have built bridges over the last 6 years.
That is excellent. And I mean, and neither one of those entities is really Pittsburgh, but they come together in Pittsburgh.
Well, see, the label is always a template that they use, and it's the Barrel and Flow template. And, you know, it gives credit to everyone that's involved in the project. And every year we change the wave for Barrel and Flow to incorporate various colors and whatnot. But we always keep that gold here, because that's the tide of Pittsburgh. So everywhere you go in the country, there's that gold Pittsburgh wave.
So now breweries all over the country, all over the world come to you and say, we'd like to be involved.
Yeah. It's it took off pretty quickly. We did that first festival in 2018. We planned to sell 700 tickets. We sold 1,200. You know, we ran out of glasses. I remember walking through the festival, you know, running around, and somebody was like carrying a rocker glass, with beer in it. I was like, yo, did you bring that into my festival? They're like, they gave this to me at the entrance. I'm like, what? And I go over to the entrance, and they're like, we ran out of glasses. We had to go to Restaurant Depot and get some more. So they ran out of glasses 2 times. Restaurant Depot closed, and then they ended up having to get Dixie cups to hand out. And each time we took $10 off or whatever. And I remember Tracy Serto, who ran Next Pittsburgh at the time. She comes in and you know, I feel embarrassed because she's coming to this festival and she's handed this Dixie cup, and I'm like, I promise you it was a much classier affair earlier, right? But you know, I mean, that showed the interest that, you know, there was in having something in the brewing industry that wasn't white dominated. And then the year after that, we ended up selling 3,400 tickets, and, you know, breweries coming in from all over. And now, you know, each year we have anywhere from 3 to 6 countries represented brewing in this festival. So, yeah, it's pretty wild. When I think about it, because, you know, you do it so long, you forget, but.
Well, and then this year, USA Today names it the best beer festival in America.
Yeah.
You know, how does that? I mean, you have to be over the moon.
Yeah, no. I mean, honestly, when you go into the festival, right? The reason why people are so ecstatic to be there is because everybody's being paid, right? Everybody is benefiting from what's happening there, right? We pay our artists. You know, the festival model for a long time, and to a degree still today, is one of a cash grab model, right? It's the only people that are being paid typically are the venue and the producer. You know, talent isn't being paid. They're paid off of exposure. Brewers are being paid off of exposure, right? Guests are overpaying, and the experience is lackluster a lot of times. With this festival, we pay our artists. We pay the brewers. We pay our staff. all living wages, right? We make sure that like when you're there, you're not just drinking beer. Each of these breweries are either black, which is a unicorn, or they're doing a collaboration. So there's a story behind it. And then of the, all the folks that are there or whatever, only about half of those booths are beer. Or alcohol of some sort. The other half are small businesses. You got 2 music stages, 4 art stages, small businesses and food vendors, right? So like there's so much to do there beyond the drinking. There's so much culture there, and everybody there wants to be there because they're benefiting in some way. They're not just being paid below wages to show up and pour something until it's time to go, right? And that is what I believe is what creates that atmosphere of like love. Like when you go to the fest, a lot of people, it's hard for me to sell it, because every time I talk about it, it just sounds like a festival. People go, yeah, whatever. It's not until you go there and then you come back and like, it's almost like a cult. Like once you walk in and you like leave, you're like changed. And it's like, I can't wait to come back. I'm bringing like 5 friends.
That sounds like an exaggeration, but I know that's what gets me back every year is you have an elation while you're there. And you see people you meet new people. It's just, sort of the ideal atmosphere at a festival.
I mean, there's also, it's also, we're very intentional, like from the ground up and building it in inclusivity, right? Like when you build something with, the lowest people on the totem pole in mind, you build it better for everyone involved, right? So when we first started this festival, I like to call this a festival that services the servicemen, right? I grew up in the food service industry, customer service, the whole 9 and whatnot. And I know what it's like to be treated poorly, to, be paid less than what you're worth, to be looked over, right? So in this, we value everyone that's there, right? And like when I'm there, I'm not like, a lot of people are like, you got to get somebody else to do that. And I'm like, when I'm there, I'm doing whatever's necessary. When you see me at the fest, I'm carrying like bags, I'm like filling ice, I'm doing whatever's necessary. And as a result, like, when we built this festival, we went to the women, we went to the LGBTQ community, we went to brewers, we went to artists. Hey, what do you hate about festivals? What's the worst thing about festival? What do what would you, if the perfect festival, what would you have, right? And in doing that and listening to the community, we were able to build this festival up that like, and having folks on our board is a very diverse board. So it's not just a festival of who I am, right, as a black man, right? It's a festival that has the voices of all these other communities. And in doing that, you see all these communities present and happy. And you really notice like how rare that is in the country in general. Like how many mixed spaces are there truly? I mean, racially, you are totally right. When you're there, you think like, wow, there's white people here and black people here, and we're all mixing together, and it seems to work. Yeah,
why don't we have more of this?
Yeah. Like, and once you see it, like a fish doesn't know it's in water until you take it out, right? But that's the thing. Once people see it, they can't unsee it, and they want more, right? And that's why, like every year, people are they're waiting for the next fest. They want to get that feeling again. But then 2, you see a lot of the efforts go on throughout the year. Like the festival is once a year. It's extended to a week now. But like throughout the year, we're doing the work, and people are always saying, "Hey, how can we get this more often?" Right?
Right. So, and it is 1 week. It's basically also one big day. Mm-hmm. This year, I remember it looked like it might rain, but it didn't. I mean, it didn't while I was there. And I was really impressed this time, I remember, with a food vendor who called himself Low Country Cooking, I think. And that, because I'd lived in South Carolina for a while, I thought, oh, Low Country Cooking, look, he's probably coming from the Carolinas. He goes, nope, I've never been there. He just knows that tradition of Low Country Cooking. I think he's from Greensboro, or Greensburg. Not Greensboro, but Greensburg. So, I mean, it was, and it still is an incredible time. And, it doesn't matter if you drink beer even.
No, I mean, we have an art enthusiast ticket. And with that art enthusiast ticket, right, like you get the music, you get the vendors, you get the food, you get access to the opportunities and whatnot. We have job opportunities there. This year we had a steam tent. science, tech, engineering, art, math, that showcased, the arts and sciences of the brews. We had the Brewers Guild there that was showcasing job opportunities. We had Point Park and Penn State there showcasing education opportunities, right? We had live brewing from Three Rivers Association of Serious Home Brewers, right? Like they were doing live brewing on site so that, people can see that you can do this yourself in your basement, right? We don't want to just have a good time. That's a large part of it. We also, this is a movement. The purpose of this festival, again, from the beginning, was to introduce new people to it. And if we're going to do that, we need to, need to have those opportunities. Our art director this year doesn't even drink beer. He doesn't drink alcohol at all. But he gets paid to curate the art for the festival. So that's one of our messages is, you don't have to brew. You don't even have to like beer in order to make money from this industry.
Well, actually, I read that. I put this quote down that I'd read from you that said, not just beer, it's culture. And that's totally cool. I wonder, it happens once a year, summertime. How much of your year does that take up? I mean, the whole year getting ready for it? You're working now on 2024.
Yeah. Right after this, I'm going to a couple of meetings to set up, venues and hotels and things of that nature for next year. It's a year-long effort. It gets more intense as the year goes and whatnot. But it's, if you've been there, it's a massive undertaking. And a lot of those elements take so long to put into place. But then the beauty of it is watching it develop every year, because I'm surprised even at like what it becomes when it's all said and done. It feels like a race, and you're like doing as much as you can, like to hit the deadline. And then you get there and whatever's happening is happening. And then you see all these other people, right? It's a living, breathing thing, right? So I'm walking around the fest and I'm hearing music that I didn't book. I'm seeing like art that I didn't like, but I'm seeing, like these dances and this, that, and the other. And like, there's so many different things that I didn't even know were going to be there. But that's what happens when, you kind of bring this community together. And at this point, I'm not so much, I'm founder of the fest or whatever, the lead of it, however, but like, I feel more of a shepherd of a community, because the community, like, I feel like even if I were to, die today, this community would still exist and it would still, persist in some manner, because, I'm more of a shepherd of the community as opposed to a leader of it. So they come to me and say, this is what's going on. Like, and I'm like, all right, let me see how I can fit this in, so.
Do you do comedy at all anymore?
Yeah. Still hosting, still doing some comedy from time to time. It's less than I did before the pandemic. Okay. But yeah, still getting on stages when I can.
And the podcast still going on? Still
going on. Again, finding time when we can. But yeah, we're still doing that.
Oh, but I mean, how nice that this podcast expanded. And then there was also Ed and Day in the Berg, which was a video series, right?
Yeah. We, so I want to say, like, in the midst of the pandemic and whatnot, very local, decided to switch over to a TV channel, Hearst Broadcasting and whatnot, and they reached out to us. We had done some project with them in the past, and they reached out to us and said, hey, do you want to take Drinking Partners to the streets, on a, in a video format. And we were a little hesitant at first, working with a big, rich white corporation. I'm always a little hesitant, but, we were like, hey, let's try it out. And as a result, like, I can't even, I didn't know what to expect. But it has been a great, like, one, boon to our career, but also like seeing so much of the cool things that happen in Pittsburgh. I thought I knew growing up here and with the podcast. Then you get out into the streets and you realize, like, there's so much going on here.
That's exactly what, when watching those things, I think, like, I didn't even know this place existed.
If you didn't know it, yeah, like, now that actually makes me feel good. I'm like, all right, cool. We're introducing the Ricky C back there. It's crazy.
But that's the beauty of Pittsburgh, I think, is that it has so many surprises. And we do have this incredible Black history here as well. I actually got to be a judge down at the Soul Food Festival in Market Square a couple weeks ago. And the guy there was telling me, like, pointing out all these places, the early restaurateurs whom I did not know about, starting things in Pittsburgh. And of course, we have this incredible jazz history that is, because I've talked to Tom Roberts, even more than we know about. I mean, there's a post-war era when we know a lot of Lena Horne and Billy Eckstein and people like that. But there's even earlier than that, a lot of the black culture, starting early jazz here and all of that. So I just think that, we have to sort of protect that and embellish it and keep it going.
Yeah, I mean, that's a large part of this festival is about, before this festival, there wasn't a lot of large celebrations of blackness in this area. Again, a part of this festival's goal is to eventually build a black middle-class neighborhood. And I genuinely believe that a black-owned brewery could be a catalyst to that, right? You look at a lot, I heard a lot of the stories from various breweries. One in particular was Trogs. We went out to Hershey and heard the story about them, building their brewery kind of like at the time where there wasn't a whole lot around, and then seeing the property value go up as people wanted to like move next to a brewery, and then seeing all of the folks, the way that they brought people up from like the ground up. They came in and they were maybe wiping tanks or like serving tables, and then became, brewmasters, right? They and the wealth that they were able to build in that community as a result of that brewery. And I see a black-owned brewery as a catalyst to that. And this festival showcases, while we do have breweries come in from all across the country and the world, and we have talent come in from all over the place and whatnot, it's essentially a Pittsburgh festival. 75% of the folks that are participating there are from Pittsburgh, and a large majority of them are black, right? So when we look at that number one festival in America, we have black Pittsburgh to thank for that.
Right. And we have to somehow preserve this and keep it going, or, embellish it, keep it, lively and fun like you do, because it is a crucial part of all of this. I think of any city, certainly any American city. So, where does it go? How, do you have dreams? I mean, I guess a black middle class neighborhood is a dream that you keep mentioning, but I mean, beyond that, I mean, now that you've been the best beer festival in the world, or in the USA Today, I don't, so my goal really, I guess one of the goals that I have moving forward is to move the festival outside of the city, right? There are black folks all across the country and all across the world who would benefit from being connected to this industry, right? And the model in which we have created to do that is scalable and repeatable anywhere, right? And I've visited other cities, Chicago's and Toronto's and New Orleans and LA's, and they all go, we want this here. Right. And it's wild to visit a place like New Orleans. And, I'm sitting with the head of the business association down there. And he's like, we need this in New Orleans. Right. A place that's so rich in black culture and history and like, things of that nature. And food and the whole nine. But for them to say, hey, we need this here. It's because, like, again, this festival isn't just a fun time. It is a mechanism for change, right? So a goal of mine is to get this out there and introduce the black communities in these other areas to the brewing industry. I also, am looking at, maybe doing some sort of like brick and mortar at some point. And then my partner she started Babesburg, which is a festival, or at least a movement that seeks to connect women and folks in the area and beyond in a meaningful capacity. Similar to Barrel and Flow, where we brought the black community together. Now, we're looking, she's looking to bring women together in that same vein and utilizing the economic power of the brewing industry in order to do so. So, there's some things on the horizon, but those are two of the biggest things, is Babesburg and, just getting the festival outside of Pittsburgh. Wow. So, I don't want to see it leave Pittsburgh, but you could be elsewhere at the same time.
Yeah, so I mean, the festival will always be the main festival will always be here in Pittsburgh the second week of August, right? Second week of August is significant because it's the birth of hip hop, right? So we want that main event to be here in Pittsburgh always, but the goal is to maybe have some satellite, early spring, maybe doing something in Toronto, late fall, doing something in New Orleans, right? And just kind of traveling that around the country throughout the years, but always having that linchpin here in Pittsburgh, because again, it is a great place to visit in the summertime. There are a few places in the world that you are going to have more fun. I mean, the people in Pittsburgh, when you get a sunny day in Pittsburgh, I mean, there's just very few places that celebrate and have that enthusiasm that Pittsburghers have for it. And then to be honest, I mean, I've been kind of selling Pittsburgh like a third world country, because I'm like, people come in, they're like, I can't believe things are so cheap here. Like, like they get a drink and they're like, $6 for a drink. Oh my God. It's like, I'm like, yeah. Have you seen the cost of real estate here? It's also amazing. Right. So, I think that this is a great place, and I think that it would do the festival a disservice to move it from Pittsburgh in the summer times.
And I didn't know this connection to the history of hip hop, but this year's 50th anniversary. And I didn't realize from the beginning that was a connection.
Yeah, so Fresh Fest actually was an old hip hop festival back in like the late 80s, early 90s that shut down. So that was originally what Fresh Fest was. That's why Puff Daddy owns it, because, I don't think he has a Fresh Fest going on. But you know how people just like buy trademarks and be like, well, I don't want you to use it, right? You know what I mean? So, but yeah, I mean, from the very beginning, it was a connection to hip hop, and that second weekend was always, like when we were looking at dates and whatnot, was the birth of hip hop.
Cool. I wanted to ask you, just because I have a relatively new podcast here with Gumbands, and you had to grow up knowing the word Gumbands.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But because you've done so many. And I think I was on 100.
Yes,
with
you were. Yeah.
That was a live one. But because of that, I wonder, like, who are the guests you really remember? Who should I have on this that, I haven't thought about yet? Or you must have favorite guests over the years.
Yeah. So,
no promises.
Yeah. No, a couple of the ones that stick out, for me, some of the more fun ones. We had, Sarah Enamorado and Summer Lee on the same podcast. They came in, the Sister Reps, and that was a great podcast. It was lively. We were excited because, me and Summer went to the same, high school. We're both from Braddock, and it was a lively podcast about, like, this was when they were like first running and whatnot, and it was about like this hope and change and like the excitement of young folks getting into politics and whatnot. Another one was Mikey and Big Bob. Having them on and just like having like four comedians just have fun for an hour or however long that podcast was just, man, to this day, one of my highlights. Of course, you coming in with the Les Reservoirs, like, I mean, showing us up with the cognac. That was a big memory for us, because it helped to legitimize us. Fetterman was another one. Having him down at Brew Gentlemen was a big one. And we do a live podcast every year for the festival. And the 1 year we had Garrett Oliver, who is, like this godfather of the brewing industry. He also happens to be a black man and world famous. And to have him come into Pittsburgh for that year and discuss, his background and whatnot, and really, having him open up about being a black man in the industry, being so prominent, and assuming that just by being black, more black folks would come to him for opportunities, and him understanding and saying, I understand that, I need to meet the people where they are. And that was huge, because, people get to a place in their careers, and they become complacent a lot of times, and they go, well, I'm here, why can't you get here? And, for us, people like yourself, people like Garrett Oliver, who have stepped outside of their normal roles or whatever, or, constantly are reaching out. I see you all over the place, right? And one of the things that folks love about you, and one of the things that, I admire the most is that, like, you're reachable, right? Like, you haven't gotten to a place and you're like, well, I'm just going to gatekeep this and just kind of be here or whatever. You actually are still like growing, evolving, and are a part of the people and whatnot. So that was a big thing, having Garrett Oliver come in for that. And, those are for me some of the most memorable ones.
Okay, cool. No, and that's it. I always remember a college professor I had that one day he said to the class, you kids don't want to hear this, but you will get tired of everything in life. He said, except for one thing, learning new things. And that's it. I mean, surprises are what life is all about. And, to stay open to all possibilities, I think, is really, really important. I thought, like, here, we record these in the morning. I did bring 2 of my little taster glasses from Barrel and Flow. And I didn't know if you've had any of this.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, Barmy?
Oh, yeah.
This is Barmy Soda, which is made by East End Brewing. This is their hop water. Do you know this?
Yes, yeah, it's very good.
Oh, because I play records at the Independent Brewing Company on Wednesday nights, and Kelsey, the bartender, mentioned this, and I thought, like, I don't know hop water. There's apparently a brand called Hop Water, but this is locally made by East End Brewing. I don't know, is that Larimer over there where they live?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're in Larimer.
It is. And I just thought, cheers.
Cheers.
I like it because I'm not crazy about flavored water, but there's something about this flavor that feels totally natural.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice. They actually did a collaboration this year with a black-owned brewery out of Toledo called Black Frog. And it's 2 parts. It was a beer, and then it was a barmy. I want to say it was like a raspberry soda sort of seltzer situation, and then you mix the two to make a raspberry rattler, I guess is what it's called.
I didn't know about this.
Okay. Yeah. So like it was a 2-part that they did, and it was a barmy. Branded from East End and Black Frog this year. So very familiar with the brand, and it's a nice way, again, like a lot of when I first got into doing the festival, the industry was still in a different place, and we were just like cracking beers at like 9, 10 a.m. Right? You know what I mean? Like,
you're a better man than I am.
Yeah, like we were just like, I go in, we'd have a meeting, they're like, you want a beer? And I'm like, of course I want a beer. I'm at a brewery, right? And I think at some point the industry was like, we got to slow this down, right? This is not sustainable. So a lot of it's the better for you movement. So the low ABVs, no ABVs, seltzers, hop waters, things of that nature that give you the flavor, the bite, the sensation almost of drinking without destroying your liver at 9 a.m.
All right. Well, I mean, I don't know, what else should I ask you about? I'm so happy that you're here in Pittsburgh. I'm happy about all the work that you do. It's anything else here that we should know about? I mean, these things you brought. Goodlander?
Yeah. So again,
I think I saw Goodlander in one of your videos.
Yeah. So Goodlander, local cocktail brewery and whatnot. We met them on the show. And Ari Cole did that collaboration with Goodlander. So Ari Cole is one of the artists that we introduced to the brewing industry. Has since done a lot of amazing things. He has this ongoing series, Slappers and Bangers, one of the best dance parties in the city. And they did that collaboration there. He designed the label, the bottle. That's actually his logo on the front of it. So that's the collab that they did. I did a collab with Ultra Genius. There's 2 black brewers, Deshawn and Daylin. And then they brought me in to do it another day. So we called it 3-Day Weekend. So it's cool to still be doing these, collabs myself. And then one of the perks of the TV show, we went down to the 25 Wines the Roberto Clemente Museum and whatnot, and they
In Lawrenceville,
and they made this couple of bottles of Ed and Day Cabernet. It's part of the Ed and the Bird.
It sounds good, doesn't it? Ed and Day Cabernet.
And, so like it's just, and then the Pittsburgh Comedy Festival, which was, sometimes I forget and it's wild, but that was my introduction to festing. I was the director of comedy for the Pittsburgh Comedy Festival for 3 years. Actually, the first year of Fresh Fest was my last year at Pittsburgh Comedy Festival. I did both of these festivals in the same month of August. And I got to meet, W. Kamau Bell and like a lot of these bigger name headliners or whatnot as a result of that. And I learned a lot about fest making from the Pittsburgh Comedy Festival that I then applied to Fresh Fest and beyond. So, yeah, it's been a pretty awesome career and whatnot. And
So when people ask you, what do you do for a living? What do you say?
I hustle. I mean,
You say I'm a shepherd of the community?
yeah, I mean, it's weird because a lot of people actually do. A lot of it's been coming up more often. People will just see me at the thing. They go, "What do you do when I don't see you?" Right? You know what I mean? Like, because whatever I'm doing can't possibly support my lifestyle, right? And they're right. It takes a lot, right? This Mavuno Festival, I do some consulting, I do comedy, I do hosting, I do the fest. There's a TV show, we do the podcast. Like, it's kind of like, the life of an artist. I remember when I first started comedy, another comedian, Aaron Kleiber, who is one of the greats here in Pittsburgh. And he shared this article that said that, a lot of stand-up comedians, they start their career in stand-up comedy, but they don't stay there. They typically branch out into other things in order to maintain. So writing, acting, producing, a lot of these other aspects, right? So I, from a very early part of my career, said, well, I'm not going to pigeonhole myself to just stand-up, right? And then again, when I met you, I remember being like at this, Hoptoberfest and whatnot, and like folks were coming up and like, they're sitting down, they're talking to you, and you're regaling them with like stories of like their hometown and the bridge that they crossed to get here and like the shirt that they're wearing and like, and I remember like, kind of looking more into your career and whatnot. And I was like, man, this guy he gets paid, goes around, he eats food and like meets people and gets to like do all this fun stuff. I was like, I'd love to do that, right? So I honestly based a lot of my like career off of what you were doing and saying, well, I mean, I'd love to do something like that too. So, because you platform so many other people, seeing how that helped boost your career, right? I mean, like when you support the community supports you as well, and how like well loved and appreciated you are as a result of that. So I kind of wanted to do that same thing. And like, if you look at all these various like things and whatnot, they are means of platforming other folks, brewers, like comedians, the city of Pittsburgh, women, artists, right? I mean, so.
And they're all thankful, and they all like you and thank you, and I think that's the beauty of all of this. And I thank you for being on Gumbands, because I've learned a lot, and aspects of this that I never really considered. I've always known it was important, but I didn't think I knew how important it was.
Oh, well, that means a lot coming from you, sir. And again, I appreciate you and everyone that has supported everything that we've done throughout the years. None of it is possible. I don't make art. I don't brew beer. I don't cook foods all like that or whatever. It really does take a community. I don't hold the cameras, like it takes a community to make this happen. So
yeah, and you help raise everybody up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we all, I'm a very lanes-driven guy. I stay in my lane, right? If somebody comes to me for something, I let them know that if I can, I can. But if I can't, I direct them to somebody else's lane and whatnot. And I think as a result of that, when you realize that you're just a piece in a larger puzzle, I think that really is the key to success.
I thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
I just want to ask, is there a story behind the necklace?
Yeah, so a friend of mine makes these. She's a German woman, and she does hip-hop style jewelry. And I always wanted to be a rapper, but I can't rap or afford gold. So this is a nice, affordable way to kind of like be in the lifestyle, and also support, people that and artists and whatnot. It's also a conversation starter. A lot of people go, oh, that's a nice necklace there or whatever.
It's a microphone.
It's a microphone, right? And as a comedian, like it's very apropos. Yeah, I mean, I started wearing this at the beginning of my comedy career. And honestly, I was supporting artists then, and I've been supporting artists since.
So this is a vintage piece.
Yeah, I've had this for 11 years now. Yeah, 2012 I got this piece, and yeah, I've got more since then, but this is my baby.
Excellent. I could talk to you all day.
This Gumbands podcast is made possible by the Buell Foundation, serving southwestern Pennsylvania since 1927, and by listeners like you. Thank you.
You know that everything we do at WQED depends on you and viewers and listeners like you. And public broadcasting now includes public podcasting. If you've liked any of the episodes of our Gumbands podcasts, we hope that you'd consider becoming a member at $5 a month or $60 a year. And if you'd like us to send you a classic tote bag, because lots of places are getting rid of their plastic bags, we'll do that too. Just go to gumbands.org or Gumbands wherever you get your podcasts and look for the donate button in the little description. Thanks.